which is going to be on post-COVID complications. All of us are dealing with either COVID cases or sequelae of these patients. And I thought it'd be a good way to bring some focus into what are the issues that are faced with these patients and how we can go about what is the state of knowledge so far. So in today's program, I'm very pleased to welcome two experts. One is Dr. Harshvardhan. Professor Harshvardhan has been ex-professor of cardiology at RML Hospital, a very well-known figure. Presently, he's in Jaipur, and we are very happy that he can join us through this tele-model. So welcome, Dr. Harshvardhan, sir. And I also have my colleague, Dr. Anil Vardhani, who is, Dr. Vardhani is a senior physician at our hospital, very experienced, a very wise person, and whom I also consult when my family members need medical advice. So I'm very pleased to have Dr. Anil Vardhani with us. And these two experts along with us will be guiding us through the session. So as is the practice with ECHO, we have a case-based session. And I'm going to welcome Dr. Arun Katoch, who has dealt with this case, and to present the details of the case so that we can kick off the discussion. Anyone and everyone is welcome to offer, and we welcome everyone's participation, because as Aarti said, as Anjali said, that this is a learn all, teach all. Everyone is learning and everyone is teaching at the same. So we welcome Dr. Arun to please start the case presentation. Like Anjali said, if
Bluetooth connected.
Hear you, sir.
Yes, Dr. Arun, please.
Am I audible to all? Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
I'm audible. Good evening to all of you. And I am Dr. Arun Katoch, associated with Dr. Neeraj Bhalla in BLK Hospital in cardiology. So I'll be presenting a short case regarding COVID sequelae and thrombotic complication associated with them. So there's a brief history here. We have a 46-year-old gentleman, known hypertensive, very well in control, non-diabetic, suffered from...
फोन में ही आ रही है आवाज.
Hello, now audible? Hello, am I audible now?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah. So again, we'll start. Here we have a gentleman, 46 years old, known hypertensive, well in control, non-diabetic, suffered from COVID-19 pneumonia in July this year, and was admitted for the same at other hospital where he recovered and was discharged. During the course of treatment, his peripheral venous Doppler was done, which was suggestive of complete thrombosis of left deep venous system, whereby he was stabilized and discharged on medications. The medications, the ones he was discharged on, was tablet dexamethasone, tablet Ecosprin, Betaloc, vitamin C, and paracetamol SOS basis. Now again on 26th of September, this gentleman comes to our hospital with complaints of pain and swelling of left lower limb, breathlessness, dry cough from last 2 days. When clinically we examined him, his pulse was 140, blood pressure was 140/90, and saturation he was maintaining about 92% on room air. There was non-compressible swelling of left lower limb extending from upper thigh to the mid-leg level when we examined him. His ECG was suggestive of normal sinus rhythm with sinus tachycardia, as you can see. Chest X-ray was suggestive of fibroreticular opacities seen in bilateral lung fields. The rest of the lung fields were clear. Bilateral CP angles were clear. Cardiac size is normal.
Arun,
Sure.
okay, but, after the echo findings, maybe we can stop and initiate the discussion. I will just like to say that the patient, after he got discharged from the other hospital, the discharge notes only said that the patient required high flow oxygen at 10 liters per minute, and he was discharged on the medication that you mentioned. And then he gradually developed progressive swelling a week or 2 weeks later. And he went there and they did an ultrasound Doppler and found this swelling was this DVT was there, and then they referred this patient to us. All right. So this, just to correct that, on discharge, this was not the condition.
Okay.
The patient was discharged, all right, but the swelling and of the left lower limb developed about 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later. Okay, sir. Fine. So his echo findings were like there was no regional wall motional abnormality. Mild concentric LVH was present, trace MR, mild TR with PA pressures of 40 millimeter mercury, and grade 1 diastolic dysfunction was there. Normal right ventricular systolic function. No clot was there, no mass, no pericardial effusion, with normal EF of about 55%.
All right, all right. So at this stage, can I get in Dr. Anil Vardhani to offer his comments about how
disconnect.
Yeah, sorry. So Arun, if you can go back to your slides, and if you can get Dr. Vardhani to comment on the course of his and what were the findings, and how, whether the discharge diagnosis or discharge treatment was appropriate, anything else.
Start from the
Go back to your slides. Yes.
We start from here, sir.
Yes. So I'll just correct this, that he suffered from this SARS-CoV-2 pneumonia in July, was admitted elsewhere, and the discharge note simply said that he required high flow oxygen at 10 liters per minute. Next slide. Next slide, please. Hello?
It is there, sir.
Yes. And this was the treatment that the patient was discharged on. So Dr. Vardhani can now initiate the discussion, and we'll invite other comments also.
So with your first slide, it is clear it is a COVID disease. Okay, but there is a lack of investigations from the previous hospital. What was the inflammatory markers or D-dimer, CRP, and other parameters are not available at the time of last admission. So have you any idea about these markers?
No, sir. These markers were not done, sir.
And not mentioned. Okay. Okay.
So Dr. Vardhani, do you think that for every patient who is treated in hospital with COVID-19, to do inflammatory markers, is it a must?
Yes, sir. So we have to assess the risk of the patients, and if these markers are on the higher side, D-dimer, CRP, and especially D-dimer and CRP or serum ferritin levels, these, if markers are high on the higher side, these patients developed thromboembolic phenomena in future. So we have to decide which group of the patient is required prolonged treatment. So for assessment of these patients, it is not mandatory, but it is essential to assess at the before discharge.
Okay. So the inflammatory markers, I believe, are the IL-6, serum ferritin, D-dimer, and can you tell us the significance of each?
Serum ferritin and IL-6 just showing the inflammatory response of the body to the disease, and D-dimer for the thromboembolic phenomena or means probable thromboembolic phenomena, and to start the prophylactic therapy. As far as prophylactic therapy is concerned, nowadays it is because at the time of this New York peak of pandemic, it is noticed that those patients receive thrombolytic therapy have a good outcome. Number of patients gone on intubation are less, even 50% benefit of the patient. So we have to assess, and D-dimer is one of the major inflammatory marker. If it is more than 5, and we have to give prophylactic treatment.
So anyone else has any comments to make on the line of management or the need for, what is the practice that is being followed? Are inflammatory markers being routinely checked, or is this line of treatment enough? Anyone else's comments are most welcome, because all of us are learning to treat this condition, and sharing of our knowledge will be good. So would anyone like to make some comments regarding management of COVID-19 during the active phase?
What was the idea of giving beta log and ecosprin to this patient?
Well, this patient, Dr. Harshvardhan, was treated in a nursing home in Delhi, in which there was a cardiologist who was in charge over here. So we are not sure. Actually, we only got the discharge summary, and these were the discharge medications that were mentioned.
Only thing is, was it given only for COVID, or was there an associated hypertension or coronary artery disease?
Yeah. So
and let us ignore that hospital. What is the standard practice in a good tertiary care hospital? Are these drugs given routinely for COVID patients, or they are not recommended?
Sir, as far as dexamethasone is concerned, this is the nowadays almost standard care of treatment. And ecosprin, it is not a routine practice, and it is not even a beta log is a good choice for as far as antihypertensive is concerned.
Yeah. So I think as far as comorbidities are concerned, what is appropriate for the condition for, say, hypertension or diabetic drugs will continue as per the clinical situation of the patient. But the discharge medication, like Dr. Vardhani is saying, I think now steroids has become sine qua non, almost, de rigueur for all patients being discharged. Vitamin C.
Yeah, vitamin C and zinc.
So these are, what about vitamin D?
Vitamin D is also.
So these could be some of the standard medications, but as far as ecosprin is concerned, no. As far as beta log is concerned, those also does not seem to be adequate for, so we're not sure what is the purpose for which this was given.
If D-dimer is high and a patient received sub-Q heparin, Clexane, which is nowadays also a standard care of practice, using sub-Q low molecular weight heparin is a standard practice. So those patients are on this, we can, at the time of discharge, we can use DOAC, the direct anticoagulant agents.
Dr. Rajiv Verma and Dr. Seema Kale, any comments on?
What I am following in my patients, where I'm doing every 72 hours or 48 hours, D-dimer, CRP, absolute lymphocyte count, and ferritin. So I'm observing if D-dimer is rising more than 1000, or CRP is more than 100, or ferritin is also rising at absolute lymphocyte count is less than 1000. Then we start with basically methylprednisolone and enoxaparin. So I think that should be started earlier when the oxygen level is coming low, less than 93, because this is a time when they become complicated. So if we have any small patch on the lungs, on the X-ray, D-dimer is rising, CRP is rising above some level, then I think we should start with enoxaparin and with the Metrol or dexamethasone. But in one case I saw when CRP was 100, but D dimer did not rise at all. It was a mild case and it settled by its own without any complication. So alone CRP will not help. I think.
Okay. Can we see the X-ray of the patient, Dr. Arun? Yeah. So looking at this X-ray, what will be the comments? Is this COVID pneumonia? Is this fibrosis? Is this resolving? What would the comments be about this X-ray?
I think this is a resolving pneumonia and fibrosis, leading to fibrosis in the left mid zone.
So,
and some pleural thickening and effusion at the left base.
so some people are using CT in place of doing the RT-PCR. Are the CT findings or the X-ray findings so characteristic that we can make a diagnosis? I know that we can make a prognostic score out of looking at the CT findings, but are the CT and X-ray findings so typical that we can make a diagnosis of COVID pneumonia?
No, we can't make diagnosis of COVID pneumonia on the basis of CT only. It is mandatory to go for a RT-PCR for a final diagnosis, but we can assess the prognosis and involvement of the lung area for this CT. And CT, no doubt, it is very sensitive to catch these pneumonic patches, but it is not specific for COVID-19.
What about treatment? Will the CT findings dictate initiation of treatment, or is that done only on clinical situation and by the markers? For example, remdesivir or tocilizumab. How are you guided in treating these patients? By what is your guidance to initiate these molecules?
Sir, as far as remdesivir indication is concerned, this is whenever oxygen requirement is more than 5 liters, and in those cases, remdesivir is indicated. But it may be beneficial in other cases also, but government and these authorities are limited to this guideline, most likely because of using this drug in a seriously or critically, to just reserve this drug for critical patients. So
and what about steroids? Are you waiting for example, in the US, I believe, unless the patient is hypoxic, they are not initiating steroids. Do you agree with that contention?
But with the experience of last 5-6 months, steroid is definitely a useful thing. A patient having hypoxic and involving this inflammatory marker on the higher side, so short course of 4 to 5 days, steroid is very useful.
How much was the oxygen saturation during this admission in BL Kapoor Hospital?
It was approximately 92%, sir.
92%.
92% on room AC.
So what is the probable cause of hypoxemia in these patients?
Yeah. So would anyone...
Is it COVID, or is it pulmonary embolism, or anything else?
So that's why that's why this patient was admitted and evaluated. Arun, can you go back to your previous slide showing the clinical presentation at our hospital? Yes. Go back one more. Go back. Yes. So this was his presentation. He actually presented with pain and swelling of the left lower limb, and he was found to be tachycardic with some hypoxia. So we then proceeded to investigate. So X-ray, echo, and ECG are shown. Go to the ECG. Next, yes. So this is simply showing sinus tachycardia, not showing us any features of RV strain, no features of incomplete right bundle branch block, no features of any S waves in lead 1 or any Q waves in lead 3. So sinus tachycardia, again, non-specific, not taking us anywhere. The X-ray we have just discussed.
I think this ECG must be 2-3 days later on, because at the time of admission, the heart rate was 140.
Yes.
This one is showing heart rate of about 100 or so.
Right. So this ECG was from the hospital only, maybe not at the point of admission, but probably on the same day or maybe a day later. You're right. This is not showing a heart rate of 140, slightly less. Next. So show the X-ray. Yeah. And we did a CT pulmonary angio. Do you have the films over there? So I think we did a CT pulmonary angio and a CT venogram. So that showed us, yeah. So 1 minute. Arun, if you can stop screen sharing, then we'll show the CT pulmonary and the CT venogram. And then, yeah. So we have my colleague, Dr. Bilal, who people who have been attending these sessions are familiar with, who we have often called on to help us make these presentations at the end. So Dr. Bilal will just discuss let's go to the CT. Is it in this?
Yes.
So we wanted to come back.
Yes.
Yeah. So will you talk to us about the CT, please?
Yeah, this was the CT pulmonary angio, which we did in this patient.
Next one.
So there was an direct evidence from the CT pulmonary angio. There was a thrombus in the distal to the bifurcation of pulmonary arteries and in the sub-segmental branches also. So we can visualize here. This is a thrombus. We can visualize in multiple slide sections. This is a thrombus this is the left pulmonary artery, and this is also in the right pulmonary artery. So there was a direct evidence. We have taken a CT pulmonary angio of the lower limbs also.
You want to show that? Yeah. Okay, we can come back to that later. So based upon these findings, probably the hypoxia was a combination of both post-COVID pneumonia with some fibrosis as well as pulmonary embolism coming from massive DVT involving the left lower limb. So that was the diagnostic formulation.
In these type of the hypoxic patient, here the role of HRCT is because so many times we are seeing X-ray are not showing a large involvement of the parenchyma of lung, but HRCT showing a significant patchy involvement in some patients, more than 50-60% of the lung involvement, which is not showing on plain X-ray.
So can we get some feedback as to how many of us have been seeing, post-COVID thrombotic complications like this? I remember reading one of my colleagues from New York made a presentation, and they were in the initial days, maybe in March or April, they were finding patients suddenly dying even after they were discharged home. Probably the presumption was of pulmonary embolism. And here actually in this case, we had proof of this post-COVID patient discharge coming back with DVT and with pulmonary embolism. Sometimes if the DVT is not prominent, it may not be detected or picked up also. So has anyone come across these complications? Yes, Dr. Ashwardhan.
So whether this DVT occurred post-COVID or was it present during the initial admission also, because they did not do any ultrasonography, etc. As it has been seen that in almost many times up to 40 to 50% of the patients who are admitted with COVID show some evidence of DVT. That has been shown in studies.
Right. So in this patient, you're right. There was no mention in the discharge summary regarding whether he had or not. But as far as once we interrogated the patient, he was all right when he left, when he was discharged. But like I said, about 2 weeks later, he started developing some swelling of the lower limbs. And he kept going back to that hospital and telling them that my leg is swelling, but they could not detect anything. Only when it became very painful and very swollen, they did a venous Doppler and found that there is DVT, and then they sent him to us rather. So anyone would like to make any comments on the case so far, or share any experiences regarding post-COVID complications, or we can then now proceed to how we manage this case. So anyone would like to come in, please, most welcome, because this section of the discussion, I think we'll close here and then move on to
My
what the
question
management
is
of this.
that if a patient is admitted and he has got, say, inflammatory markers, he is a sick patient, do we routinely do their venous Doppler or we wait for the symptoms? Because it has been shown in studies that from China, etc., particularly, that as many as even 60 to 70% of the asymptomatic patients have evidence of deep vein thrombosis. And if they are given thromboprophylaxis at that stage, probably the chances of pulmonary embolism will be less, so not completely eliminated.
So I think the strategy in our hospital and in most centers is to look at how the D dimer is. And if the D dimer is elevated, all these patients will be discharged on thromboprophylaxis, which will initially be parenteral, and then they'll be switched. And most commonly, we are switching to the newer anticoagulants. Is that right,
Yeah,
Dr.
yes.
Vadani?
Because this is apixaban is the best drug, because even in NIH, those are starting the recently they have started a study, Active 4, and we are choosing the low molecular weight heparin in one arm and another arm in the apixaban 2.5 milligram Eliquis 2.5 milligram BD. So this is the best evidence based, and same thing in New York also. In the initial phase they have using the apixaban, and those patients are receiving apixaban or low molecular weight heparin are showing the maximum benefit. So all evidence till date is in favor of low molecular weight heparin in indoor patients, and for outdoor is apixaban.
Right. So Arun, if you can proceed about how we manage this patient, and then we will then move to the presentation. So go ahead, Arun, please share your screen.
So based on the clinical findings, the provisional diagnosis of DVT and pulmonary embolism was considered. And we started to manage this patient with anticoagulation, like unfractionated heparin with loading dose of 80 units per kg weight, continued with 18 units per kg per hour as a continuous infusion, targeting APTT to 50 to 70 seconds. And tablet Ecosprin 75 once daily with hemodynamic monitoring.
So my question here will be, what is the role of thrombolytic therapy in sepsis?
Yeah. No, Arun, do you have another slide, or should now Dr. Bilal be speaking?
Sir, I have, rest is, sir, we have already discussed, like we did a CT pulmonary angiogram with partial thrombosis and filling defect was found in left and right pulmonary artery.
So I'll tell you how this how we proceeded with this patient.
Oh,
So the initial diagnosis was based upon the ultrasound, the venous Doppler that showed extensive DVT, which was fitting in clinically also. So immediately this patient was started on heparin in therapeutic doses, unfractionated heparin. And we then evaluated for by a CT, which showed us that there is also pulmonary embolism, which was fitting into the clinical picture also. 24 hours later, this patient had not shown us any clinical improvement. And so what we thought is to take a more aggressive approach. And we took this patient into the cath lab, and we did a peripheral venogram by puncturing the popliteal vein under ultrasound guidance. And then we did a catheter-directed thrombolysis after doing a thrombosuction by using the penumbra system, which we adapted locally by connecting to a guide catheter. So we did a penumbra suction extensively. We got out a lot of thrombosis. Then we instituted catheter-based thrombolysis with Actylize, we gave a 10 milligram bolus, and then we gave an infusion in the thrombus for 24 hours. So that is how we manage this patient quite aggressively in view of the fact that the patient was not responding. There was extensive DVT. The patient was already quite hypoxic from post-COVID pneumonia, and we could not think that the patient will may tolerate further pulmonary embolism better. And also there is evidence that thrombolytic therapy will reduce post post-thrombotic syndrome in the lower limbs. So keeping all this in mind, we decided to go for quite aggressive management of this DVT pulmonary embolism. And we actually had an excellent result. So I'll ask Dr. Bilal to make some presentation of how the case went. Do you have those? And then maybe we can discuss a little bit more about this. All right, so that is how we manage the case. Now over to Dr. Bilal, who will present.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. As we had been discussing this case for a little while, as Dr. Vardani sir, Dr. Balla sir, and their colleagues, everybody has put their lives, what the deadly or life-threatening post-COVID complications can be. So we can have So we just will go through the cardiovascular complications of COVID. So COVID-19 virus can either directly damage the vascular system, or it can have an indirect damage that can be an immune-based or an ARDS created by hypoxemia, that is the metabolic acidosis basis. So all these things will lead to myocardial damage, can give rise to myocarditis. They can give an endothelial dysfunction that can lead to acute coronary syndromes, stroke, DVT, or pulmonary embolism, or it can be a plaque rupture that can lead to ACS or an ST elevation MI. So this is what we can get a post-COVID sequelae. We can get patient with arrhythmias, Brugada pattern arrhythmias, electrical storms, torsides, or sudden death in these patients. We can have coronary events like acute coronary syndromes, ST elevation MIs. We can have young, especially young, less than 40 years, is a very common presentation with COVID acute coronary syndromes. Or we can have thromboembolic, as we are discussing this case. This is a major sequelae of COVID. It can lead to lower limb embolism, or it can lead to pulmonary embolism, or heart failure related to myocarditis, or it can present like a Takasubu cardiomyopathy, or it can lead to other heart failure in other cardiovascular diseases. As if patient is having already some baseline cardiac disease, they can present with heart failure. So this is a common presentation of acute coronary syndrome, where we can have acute coronary syndrome, ST elevation MI with a huge thrombus in vessels, or we can have an hyperacute stent thrombosis on table with these patients. So this is another picture where we can see a pulmonary artery where there is a huge thrombus in the pulmonary artery with the red and the black arrow that is giving rise to pulmonary embolism. So regarding this patient we received in our department with the history of shortness of breath and lower limb swelling. So then we did an ultrasound Doppler. We showed a huge thrombus. Then we took this patient with giving the basic.
Thing is not working.
So this is the CT pulmonary angio of this patient, where we already discussed there was a thrombus in the distal segments of the pulmonary arteries. So this patient was having submassive pulmonary embolism, and we did a peripheral venogram where we took a popliteal puncture, and we saw a huge thrombus in the femoral and the till up to the almost the vena cava level. Then we did a thrombosuction with the catheter with a Penumbra system and put the local this thrombolytic into the vessel.
No, I think this is not running.
Last वाली slide देखिए. Double click पे चल रहा था मुझे. So what we do in these, this was a sequelae of COVID where a patient was discharged to home who presented luckily with swelling limb and pulmonary embolism. Pulmonary embolism was submassive. That was the luck for the patient, so that he reached to the hospital. There were incidences where it was seen that the people who were discharged post-COVID in a stable state suddenly died at home. So this was the reason that there had been guidelines for the anticoagulation that has been issued after this. So these are the guidelines of patients COVID-19 who are age above 18 years should receive this anticoagulation until and unless there are some bleeding contraindications. So these are the inpatient guidelines. If a patient is critically ill with DVT prophylaxis and there is a high suspicion of or risk of thrombosis or any evidence of thrombosis, including superficial veins, or there is worsening hypoxemia despite improving X-ray or lung condition, so that should be an alarming condition, and their D-dimers are more than 5,000 or they are rising, then if yes, then they should be put on anticoagulation. If no, then we can start with this enoxaparin on a hospital basis in a low dose, 0.5 mg per kg body weight twice daily. If their creatinine clearance is less than their renal dysfunctions, then we can modify the dose to once daily. So if any of these evidence is there, then we have to give a higher dose, 1 milligram per kg 2 times daily, or we can use unfractionated heparin 18 units per kg per hour infusion. With standard boluses of if we are not achieving the APTT target, we can give them standard boluses around 2,000 units per hour. Patients escalated to therapeutic anticoagulation based on D-dimer. If D-dimer is increasing or it is more than 5,000, then we have to start the prophylaxis with bolus doses of this heparin or enoxaparin. So Dovakis and warfarin, do not use these for critically ill patients. They are not considered for inpatients if they are critically ill or there is a high chance of thromboembolism. So the next category will be non-critically ill patients who require DVT prophylaxis. So enoxaparin, if body weight is BMI is less than 40, enoxaparin 40 once daily is sufficient. If BMI is more than 40, then we have to give it twice. If more than 50, we can think of the 1 milligram per kg, 60 milligram per kg twice daily. If their renal functions are compromised and GFR is less than 30, we can decrease the enoxaparin dose to 30 once daily, or heparin every 8 hourly 5,000 units. Or if their weight is high, then we have to increase the heparin also 7,500 units 8 hourly. And again, if their D-dimer is not more than 5,000, but it is between 2,000 to 3,000 or is increasing, then enoxaparin 40 should be considered twice daily, not once. So this is the avoid Novavax or Dovakis. They are not recommended in inpatient for this DVT prophylaxis. So if the patient stabilizes, goes home, then we have to extend this prophylaxis. So this is the DVT prophylaxis in inpatients. So we can use enoxaparin, we can use heparin, both as we have discussed. If there is a high risk for this, we have to give full dose, that is 60 mg twice daily. If GFR is compromised, we can think of heparin infusion or 75 or 5,000 heparin 8 hourly. Then is the patient extended thrombolysis, thromboprophylaxis for outpatients when we discharge them. If there is low bleeding risk and GFR is good, GFR is not less than 30. As sir have told, apixaban is the drug of choice. We have to give them twice daily for at least 30 days. Rivaroxaban is the another choice, 10 mg BD for 30, or enoxaparin 40 mg BD subcutaneously for 30 days if we can manage it at home. So if second question is the patient is having a higher bleeding risk or a GFR is deranged, then we have to think and discuss it with and decide it case by case basis, how we have to give prophylaxis. But definitely they will be requiring prophylaxis also. Thank you.
So our patient was discharged on rivaroxaban, 20 milligrams once a day. Actually, that was the dose that we have sent him on, which was therapeutic because the patient had evidence of major DVT along with pulmonary embolism. So initially it was 15 milligram twice, and then we have put him on 20 milligram once a day. So any comments or anyone would like to say something regarding the management of DVT and pulmonary embolism in this post-COVID-19 patient? Because we chose especially an aggressive line of management since we found and earlier we have been giving only heparin for most of these patients based upon how massive or non-massive is their pulmonary embolism. That means if the patient is hemodynamically compromised or there are features of RV strain on echo, then we consider for thrombolysis. But using this combination of thrombosuction with the penumbra device as well as catheter directed thrombolysis with in situ multi-hole infusion catheter in the thrombus, we are quite safely able to extract the thrombus, and we don't even need to use an IVC filter in these cases. Although this is not set in stone, but many of the centers around the world have started doing this without doing an IVC filter. Earlier, we used to mandatorily put an IVC filter before doing this because we were very worried that pieces of the thrombus would break and then cause worsening pulmonary embolism. But increasingly, we are doing this now without an IVC filter, and using this combination, especially in fresh thrombus, is very, very rewarding. Unfortunately, the CDs, the film were not playing, but we had extensive thrombus, and 24 hours later, we had a complete resolution with free flow from the popliteal right up to the iliac veins IVC. It was very dramatic. That's why we wanted to show it, but unfortunately, because of some glitch, we are not able to show you the film. But the follow-up also, the patient has complete resolution of his symptoms, no post-thrombotic sequelae, and he comes smiling into the OPD. So,
Dr. How much was the oxygen saturation 24 hours after thrombolysis?
Sir, he actually was not very hypoxic initially. Only when he came to the ER, his saturation 92. But otherwise, on low oxygen flow rates, he was maintaining saturation. And within 24-48 hours, we could stop his oxygen completely.
Excellent case, doctor.
So,
very well managed.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else would like to make any comments or get any?
Can you tell us in short about the penumbra device, how you use it and all that?
So penumbra device is basically, we are cannibalized it from our interventional radiology and neuro intervention people. It's basically a pump which produces suction, which are connected through some high pressure lines, into a guide catheter or a designated suction catheter.
But it is the same with the neurosurgeon use, neurologist use.
Same one, exactly the same. What we do is, because their catheters are extremely expensive, we are modifying it by using our guide catheters, which are very reasonably priced and which have got pretty large bores. We use an 8 French right coronary guide to perform the suction. We could get good amount of thrombus, and the same catheter we made multiple side holes and converted it into an infusion catheter. So we initially sprayed using a 2 ml syringe, about 10 milligram of altiplase as a bolus, what we call pulse spray of the thrombolytic. And then we connected this to an infusion pump, and we infused the TPA at the rate of 1 milligram per hour for the next 24 hours. And we thought when we took him in for a check angio, everything was resolved, so we stopped the infusion. So that's how the case was managed. So Dr. Vardhani, any final comments? If there's no one else having any observations, you would like to.
Sir, one thing for this thromboprophylaxis, so many patients of cardiology or having previous underlying diseases and having a double platelet. So we have to be. I want a comment from your side, because if patient already on double platelet, dual platelet means aspirin or clopidogrel. So in these patients, when we are using low molecular weight heparin, is bleeding risks are very high. So anything any alternative regime for that?
Yeah, so excellent question. We are actually facing this in one of our very senior doctors who is here admitted with us with COVID pneumonia and very high D-dimers. So again, there is no guidelines or there is no rules, but what we are practicing is, unless there is a very fresh PCI, or there are multiple stents, or there's left main stent, or you have done unless there's a very complex angioplasty, or so either very recent MI or recent ACS requiring stents, multiple stents, or stents in a very sensitive area like left main, then what we do is we are tapering off one antiplatelet, most likely aspirin, and we are continuing them on clopidogrel with low molecular weight heparin. This is the practice we are following, not based on any guidelines, but based upon what the bleeding risk might be, especially in elderly renal compromised patients in whom we have got a high bleeding risk. Dr. Harshvardhan sir, what would your comments be on this issue? How would you look at this problem?
I think I totally agree with you. One has to wait with bleeding. If the patient is not a recent PCI, say within last 3 to 6 months, then one can give an anticoagulation with one of the antiplatelet drugs and oral anticoagulant for 45 days or so with one of the anticoagulants, either aspirin or clopidogrel. If the patient is a recent PCI, if it has been done within say last 30 days or so, then of course one has to take the risk and give all the three drugs.
Yeah.
So basically it depends upon when the PCI was done.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
I think it's same as we have guidelines for atrial fibrillation with PCI. I think the same guidelines we can use here also when we have used the triple anticoagulation.
Yes, and keeping in mind what is the bleeding risk versus thrombotic risk, weigh the options and then take that decision. Right. So
sir,
I
one
think.
question. One question I wanted to ask.
Dr. Seema, welcome. I was wondering कि आपकी आवाज नहीं सुन रहे. So.
Thank you, sir. This is regarding tocilizumab. Are we using it?
Yes, Dr. Vardhani, tocilizumab.
A lot of controversy on tocilizumab because company is directed the studies done by the manufacturer. They are now in the public domain, they are not using this drug in COVID-19 patients, or it is not showing any benefit. But as far as from AIMS guidelines, and still we are using in a very selective cases. Those are not showing the improvement on remdesivir, with remdesivir and dexa, and having very high IL-6 levels, then we are still using in very selective cases. We are not having any option. Even patient not showing any improvement with plasma also, convalescent plasma. In those cases, we are still
you.
using.
Thank you, doctor.
All right. So
And Dr. Neeraj, excellent case.
thank you.
Excellent,
Thank you,
very
Dr.
well
Kumar.
managed.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are going to thank everyone for attending this session with two observations. So one is that there is a feedback format which the people from Echo India, this is part of their routine. So please fill up that feedback format so that we can also be guided as to how to conduct these sessions in future. Secondly, on behalf of World Heart Day, World Heart Day is on 29th of September. But we are planning our next ECHO session around World Heart Day, which will be somewhere in the second week of February. We are planning to have a cardiology symposium with some topics that we would like you to suggest to us what topics maybe you would like to have discussed, so that again, this will be a meaningful and interactive session. So this is what I would like to say, that please send your suggestions for cardiology symposium, which will be somewhere around the 11th of October. And please fill up the feedback form that the Echo India people are putting up, so that we can help us to plan further sessions. And final appeal is that please do send your clinical programs. We have made some simple forms that need to be filled up, and you can just send a simple clinical case summary of any topic or any case or any situation that you have faced that you would like more discussion, more clarity on, and we'll be happy to take it up in this forum. So thank you everyone for attending, and have a nice weekend ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Valla.
Thank you.